Hello, it's Peter Levy with news of another great week on City Extra. And among my guests this week, I've got American singing star Jack Jones, chat show host Michael Parkinson, and comedy actor Terry Scott. I'll also be looking at CB Radio, which becomes legal this week, and some of the other interesting stories in the news, as well as playing some excellent music and bringing you another round of my crossword competition, The War Game. So that's another exciting week on City Extra with me, Peter Levy, every afternoon between 2 and 6. So keep the beavers in your lap and the bears off your back, good buddy, and have yourself a fine day. 10:10 till we do it again. My first guest today on City Extra really needs no introduction. His familiar face, fast tongue and facetious comments bring a little cheer to chilly winter nights. Once a week he presents BBC Television's cinema programme Film 81, and his analysis of the new releases is often more entertaining than the movies themselves. He's also written and presented 2 series of programmes on some of Hollywood's great film stars, and is the author of several books, including a new novel which was published earlier this month. He is, of course, Barry Norman. Barry, good afternoon. Welcome
Good afternoon. Oh, thank you very much.
It must feel rather strange being on the receiving end for a change.
Yeah, it is, really. I've never quite got used to it. Always feel slightly wary about these things. You know, what loaded questions can be slipped in that I don't
you can
see
trust me.
in time. I'm sure I can. Everybody tells me that.
Your father is the well-known film director Leslie Norman, isn't he, who worked on some of the famous films like The Cruel Sea, The Long, The Short and The Tall. Why haven't you followed in his footsteps?
Well, the truthful answer, I suppose, is that I didn't want to enough, because right up until the time when I left school, I paid a kind of lip service to the idea that I was going to go automatically, as it were, into the film industry and go into the cutting rooms, as my father had done, and then work my way up to producer and director and all the rest of it. But at the time that I left school, the film industry was in one of its many slumps, and I had a long chat with my father, who said, yeah, he could get me a job, and yes, he could probably get me the right kind of union card by pulling the odd string here and there. But there was no guarantee that I could keep the job, because there were literally thousands of very qualified men out of work. And he said that he didn't really think it was such a terribly good idea for me to go into the film industry, and that I really desperately wanted to do it. And I thought about it for a while. I realised I didn't really desperately want to do it. I was much more interested, in fact, in writing, as I always have been. So I went into journalism instead.
Do you regret that at all? I mean, is there a budding film director in you now?
No, not at all. Have you ever spent any time on a film set? It is the most boring place in the world to be. And I found this so, even when I was a kid, and I used to go to Ealing Studios with my father and spend a day there. And for the morning, it was fine. I didn't mind watching them do the same thing 8 times in the morning. And we'd go off and have lunch, and that was nice, because we'd have lunch with a few stars and people like that. Then we'd come back in the afternoon, and they'd do the same thing all over again and all over again. Now, my father clearly wasn't bored, because he was the director. He was deeply involved in the whole thing. But I used to get bored out of my skull sitting around watching all this. And I still do. I hate going on film sets for more than about half an hour. Now, obviously, if I were the director of the film, I'd be like my father. I'd be totally involved in it. But to some extent, I associate the actual making of films with boredom. And so there is no budding film director in me at all.
That's incredible to hear you actually say that. Now, you were actually a gossip writer for a time, weren't you, on the old Daily Sketch and Daily Mail?
Yeah, I was, yes. Well, that was because I couldn't get any other job. I'd worked in South Africa for a couple of years after I left school, and I left there because I'd grown up a bit and realised that the political situation there was awful, and I just couldn't stand seeing another black man shoved into the pavement simply because shoved off the pavement rather than into the road simply because a white man wanted to get by, and I didn't have the courage to stay and do anything about it, so I got out and I came back. But I was still quite young. I was 20, 21 or something, and it was very hard to get a job in Fleet Street except as a gossip writer. And so I took the job as a gossip writer because I happened to be in love with a girl in London at the time and didn't want to go to the provinces or the provinces. Sorry, I don't wish to be patronised. I didn't want to go out of London to work. I wanted to stay near this girl. And the only job I could get was as a gossip writer on a Daily Sketch. It was pretty awful, really. Unfortunately, I was quite good at it, so they kept me at it for about 3 or 4 years.
What type of people did you write about then?
Oh, mostly the peerage and masters of foxhounds running away with earls' wives and things like that, you know, all the kind of dreary stuff. But the awful thing about it was, I mean, what I hated about it was this, that I'd be sent off to, I don't know, somewhere in Chelsea, to knock on the door of the home of some viscount, perhaps, and then ask him why his wife had run away with the master of foxhounds. and I would do this, and he'd say, what the bloody hell's it got to do with you? And I was stuck for an answer, because it had nothing to do with me. Of course it didn't. It had nothing to do with me or the readers of the Daily Sketch or anything. And I'd say, well, of course it doesn't really have anything to do with me unless you want to talk about it. about it? And he'd say, well, I don't. And then he'd slam the door in my face. And after a year or so of this, I thought, this is no way to earn a living. So I strived as desperately as I could to get off.
The gossip columns seem to be doing a thriving business. There seems to be more of them now than there was sort of 5-10 years ago. There's obviously a great fascination by the British public for what's going on.
Yeah, well, they were trendy then. I'm talking about, I suppose, the late 50s, early 60s. They were very fashionable at that time. Then they went out of fashion. And now people like Nigel Dempster and Paul Callan and Peter Mackay have brought them back into fashion again. It's a slightly different kind of column, because in those days the gossip columnists, the writers, were anonymous. We always had some fictitious name, like Paul Tamfield on the Daily Mail. But now the gossip writer himself is a personality within the newspaper. I think that's the difference.
Were you called Barry Norman?
No, I wrote under the name of Paul Tanfield or Charles Greville and things like that.
So films are your first love, then?
Yes, they are. Yeah, well, yes, of course they are. But they're not my only love. That's the only thing.
I suppose many people would say, what a great life going to all these pictures, seeing all the new films. Is it really like that?
Yes, it is. If you like the cinema, it's very much like that. I mean, I know that realistically, 7 out of 10 of the films that I see are not going to be much cop, and they might even really be awful. And that maybe 2 of the other 3 will be pretty good, and if I'm very lucky, 1 will be excellent. But I go along every time in my naive way thinking this one is going to be the really excellent one. And I know that I've got a 70% chance of being wrong, or even a 90% chance of being wrong, but each time I go along with that kind of enthusiasm. So if you've got enthusiasm for the cinema, and I have, because I can enjoy even very bad films. In fact, I enjoy very bad films sometimes a lot more than I enjoy very good ones, because...
Well, laughing at them?
Yeah, the unintentional laughter. So, yeah, if you like it, it's good fun. It beats working.
How many do you see in an average week or month?
In an average week, I would see 5, certainly, maybe 6.
I'm sure that a lot of listeners would be interested in knowing how your Film 81 programme is put together. You write it yourself, don't you?
Every word, yeah.
And like I said in the introduction, many people find that more amusing than the films. Do you think some people watch just for you rather than the films?
It's very hard to tell. I suppose they must do, really. I'm sure that the films and the clips are a very big attraction, but I suppose some must watch because of the way the programme is put together and the way it's presented, because after all, there's barely 2 million people a week actually go to the movies in this country, whereas 4.5 to 5 million a week will watch Film 81, even though it is 11 o'clock and after on a Monday night. So there must be something there, as well as the film clips, that attracts their attention. How
many people, in percentage terms, do you think you move to go to the cinema after seeing a clip on the television?
Absolutely impossible to say. I would. I don't even like to think about that very much, because I don't like the idea of a critic having too much power, the power to destroy a film or to make a film, which is what they have in America, after all, particularly on Broadway. The theatre critics there have infinitely too much power, and they can destroy a play in one night because they don't like it. I don't like the idea of any critic here having that kind of power. I don't think I've got it. What I think is that in this country people tend to follow certain critics. I mean, if they're interested enough to want to go to the pictures, they will read or listen to 4 or 5 critics and decide which one of those has tastes that approximate most closely to their own, and then they'll follow him. And I suppose, by the law of averages, there must be a number of people anyway who find that their tastes are similar to mine, and those I might influence to go or stay away.